Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Boardroom Forum Live. We've been over the last few episodes been discussing sustainability and what sustainability actually means for us in Africa. Today we're doing our fourth episode, and the episode is about impact. So what is impact? We're going to unpack that, and also should impact really be measured? My name is Q. I'm a partner at PwC, and today I'm joined by Julia Rosa, who is a director in our sustainability practice, or looking after sustainability, but in our strategy and practice. Julia, welcome to Boardroom Forum Live.
Thank you, Q. It's
Excellent.
good to be here.
So I'm going to challenge you on the question of impact. First of all, can you explain to us what is impact?
So I think an analogy would be really good here. So if you can imagine a beautiful, clear day and there's a lake, and you take a pebble and you throw the pebble into the lake. And as the pebble lands, you see all of these ripples going outwards in all these different directions. Mm-hmm. And that's really what impact is. So companies, organizations, they don't operate in isolation. Everything that happens, everything that they do has a consequence, whether it's direct or indirect. And that's the ripples in the pond. And so impact measurement is really about how we measure the impacts that organizations have externally, and then there's also the internal lens as well.
And would you say, as an executive, is this something that should be on the agenda of a CFO or CEO only, or do you think board members should be concerned about impact as a whole?
So, I mean, my perspective is that it's definitely a board issue in general, that all the board members should know about it, in particular the CFO, because what we're seeing play out is this connection between what we used to call the non-financial, which now we actually call the pre-financial, and the financial information. And so what happens with impact and with sustainability is there are financial consequences, and boards need to know about that. It also highlights the risks and the opportunities, which again, as we know, have financial consequences. And lead to business resilience and better decision making. So for all board members, it's really important that they understand the impact.
But I guess to understand it, you've got to measure it. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to share, why is measurement so important?
So what measuring impact does is it takes the analysis to more of a fact and science-based approach. So instead of just talking about what a company is doing, we actually put numbers to it, we quantify it. And that would be, so think of it like a profit and loss account. You would have an environmental profit and loss account, an economic profit and loss account, and an environmental profit and loss account. And all of these ultimately have a financial value attached to them, which is then measured and monitored, and that's used then so that companies can progress in the right direction, and they can understand their return on investment in certain areas of sustainability, as well as where the opportunities are to focus on.
And if we do look at those multiple income statements, how would you say it should be measured? So how do you actually go about it? I can see the concept, but on the day-to-day or on the ground, how would you do that?
So there's a toolbox of different methodologies, and it starts really with understanding what you want to measure. And then when you know what you're going to measure, you would look at which methodologies around. A lot of these are globally accepted methodologies, and we have a combination that we use depending on what it is. So for environmental impacts, certain methodologies would be used there. On the economic side, there's the social accounting matrix, which is one that's used often. On the social side, we look at the social return on investment, and then a combination of them. But the idea is really to bring it down to an amount that you can then use to kind of track and measure progress. And also you could have other metrics that are not quantifiable, that are more qualitative, but that still are very important in terms of measuring the impact that you're having.
And in that measurement, so I can see it, I guess, for, and I'm going to use a term, more sophisticated organizations being able to do it. I can see how that might play up, let's say, in different environments around the world. But from an Africa perspective, we've got societal issues. Clearly, the climate, and we think about climate, is really important for Africa. And in previous series where we've touched on sustainability, we've touched on just what the impact will mean for Africa. Would you like to share, just when we think about impact from an Africa context, what does that look like?
So from an African context, it's even more important to understand and measure your impact, because, as you said, we do have these, we have a lot of societal and economic issues and pressures, and also a lot of countries are affected by climate change more so than other regions. So from that perspective, it's very important, and also as a way of tracking progress and tracking improvement. And then there's also the funding aspect as well, so to attract investors, to attract investment for projects and for business, it's very important to understand impact, and African context is very, very important.
So we've been talking a lot in other episodes around sustainability and kind of how it features for Africa. I can see how the ability to measure these multiple profit and loss accounts with sustainability in mind can feature for, let's say, Europe or the US, etc. But for Africa, what does that actually mean? Do you think it's key for us as well here?
So, Q, I think it's more important for us in Africa than it is in other regions. We have a lot of social and economic issues that need to be improved. And, there's a saying or a cliche, and it's a cliche for a reason, but it's so true. You can't manage what you can't measure. And so we have to measure the impacts in Africa. What's key here really is around attracting finance. It's important to be able to understand the impacts. And then localization is a big thing in impact measurement. What is the impact of localizing your supply chain? What is the impact of localizing your production, of actually bringing what has typically been outsourced into other regions back into Africa to actually stimulate economic development, stimulate economic growth, job creation, all these indirect effects around education, around access to healthcare, around all these other direct and indirect impacts from localization. So that's a key point. And then also to attract funding. It's very important to understand impact.
So on that funding point, I can only imagine that funders also look for value, right? And shareholders look for value. So what am I getting in return for what I've invested in measuring impact? So would you say that as a shareholder, this is also really important for them? And how does it impact the share price, if it does at all?
So there's a lot of research has been done into the correlation between share price, shareholder value, and sustainability and measures and sustainability practices. And there's definitely a positive correlation that comes out, because there's a lot of different variables that go into it. It's not always that easy to quantify, but the research is showing that there's definitely a positive correlation. And one of the main reasons for that is better risk management. So when you have this information, in particular around impact, when you have the information, you understand exactly what your operating context is, the risks, as well as the opportunities that will translate into enhanced value for the organization, and ultimately that becomes shareholder value.
Okay, so having touched on all these aspects, as PwC, how do you actually go about doing this work on impact? Can you share with our audience just some of the things that they'd be seeing when they see you come deliver this service?
Sure. So just to start, we'd look at the two different lenses, right? So there's the outward-looking aspect of impact, and then there's the inward-looking aspect of impact. So outward would be how does the organization how does the organization impact the community and the economy? And there we look at different metrics. We look at data that's available. We look at the value chain. We look at the direct, the indirect, and the induced impacts. And then there's also the inward piece around impact. So in other words, how is my organization impacted? And that is then used for strategic decision making, for how do we know if we're in the right direction. It's a forward-looking piece. So reporting is often typically backward-looking. Impact measurement, we look at an as-is. There's also a backward-looking approach, but there's a forward-looking approach.
Right.
So the first step would be to scope and to understand what are we actually looking at, what are we measuring. And then we would look at the value chain, collect the data, and run the different models. So there's environmental models, there's social, and there's economic models, and then we do the analysis of that data. And it's all about the insights that you get from that. So a common use or a typical use for impact studies would be stakeholder relations. So if you're negotiating with government, if you have stakeholders that need to understand the impacts of the organization, particularly in mining, it's very important to understand your communities and to use impact studies to show your positive contribution. Often what we see is companies are doing a lot more than they realize that they're doing. And these impact studies are actually a nice way of strengthening that narrative around impact. And then on the strategic piece, it's about how do we then take that information, look forward, and actually make sure that the company is investing in the right things and on the right path.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Julia, thank you for your time. In conclusion, let me start with a call to action. So what impact are you having as a corporate in the wider space, from society to risk management to your strategy, etc.? Julia's impacted very nicely for us and also helped us to understand what impact really means. Lastly, this is the end of our sustainability series. And just as a recap, in episode 1, we touched on just transition. So what is just transition and what does it mean for in the Africa context and also the South Africa context? In episode 2, we went on and we said climate adaptation, what does that look like? And again, how does it feature for Africa? And also, what does adaptation mean for businesses? The third topic, as you can imagine, on how sustainability impacts society is what does social cohesion look like? And today we touched on impact. So it's a wrap from us, and I hope you enjoyed our sustainability series. Thank you very much.